Kia ora everyone and welcome. My name is Christopher and I'm an intern here at the Human Rights Measurement Initiative. And today I'm going to give you a short demonstration on our rights tracker, in particular looking at the economic and social rights of New Zealand. Now you're more than welcome to follow along with me if you go to your search engine and you go to rightstracker.org. You can also change the web page into one of the 5 specified languages here. Or alternatively, you can download a Google Translate plugin to your Chrome browser, and this allows you to translate the page into one of the following languages specified here. So the Rights Tracker is our main site that we put all of our data that we've collected and collated up, where people can come and actually look at it. The Rights Tracker is our main tool for us to be able to get across to the people that need our data most, that are going to use them for advocacy or in further research. Currently, we measure across 13 rights, which we divide up into 3 groups. The quality of life rights, which is made up of 5 economic and social rights. Then, of course, we have our 5 civil and political rights, which comprise the safety from the state rights. And then finally, the empowerment rights, which are made up of 3 civil and political rights. Currently, for the data that we have now, we have 199 countries that we have complete data for, as well as 39 people groups that we look at for at risk of right violation. You can explore the rights tracker in 3 different ways. One way is to have a look at each individual right and see how every country that we have data for is doing. Alternatively, you could search up your own country or a country that you're interested in and see how they're performing on each right, which is what most people start off with first. And then finally, you can also look at risk groups such as LGBTQIA+ people from our at-risk surveys that we conduct every year. So to start off, we're going to look at the economic and social rights of New Zealand. So in the search bar here, we're just going to type in New Zealand. Now, the first page you're going to land at is the at a glance page. And this summarizes the 3 different rights groups that we measure across: the quality of life, safety from the state, and empowerment rights. And these are the summaries here. Now, the summaries are no different to what's been shown on those 3 different tabs. And we're going to sidestep the civil and political rights at the moment, and we're going to jump straight to the quality of life tab. So in the quality of life tab, we get the overview. And the overview is telling us, in 2019, how well is New Zealand doing compared to what is possible at its level of income? So if we look at the score to the right to education, which says 85.3%, that is telling us, based on what is international law, New Zealand is doing 85.3% of what is possible given its level of income. So this is telling us that New Zealand is sitting within the bad to nearly fair range, and there's some room to improve on the right to education score. When you click on these bars, they are going to tell you the summary of those scores, but also you can click on these drop downs to see, how do we define this human right? What aspects of this right do we measure, given the 2 different standards, which is the low and middle income assessment standard, and the assessment standard for high income, and also where we source our data from. You can switch the view by going to switch view, and you can change it from high income to low and middle income to see how New Zealand is doing with the low and middle income assessment standards. However, please take note that when it comes to the quality of life data for high income countries like New Zealand, it's best to look at the high income standard, as this better reflects the human rights challenges in those countries. You can also change the performance benchmark from income adjusted to global best to see how well the country is doing compared to the rest of the world, including the wealthiest countries. And this is better done with the low and middle income assessment data. But if you have high income countries, you could also look at it as well to see what the global best is and see where New Zealand would be sitting with the income adjusted benchmarks. If we scroll down, we can see that with all other high-income countries, New Zealand compared is doing close to average when we look across the rights for the data for the countries that we have data for. If we scroll further down, we can break rights up into fuller details. So for instance, the right to education is actually made up of 4 other sub-rights. So the right to secondary education, quality of education for math, reading, and science. If we look at this overall score, we can see what's really dragging the score down is the quality of education in maths and reading, which New Zealand is only achieving 71.8%, and 73.4% of what is possible given its level of income, respectively. And if we click on these scores again, we can also see how do we define this score. So this is on the right to quality of education maths score. And the indicator data that we use is the percentage of students achieving at level 3 or better on the PISA maths tests. Now, the HRMI scores are giving us the progressive realization of a country to see how well they're performing given the level of income that they have. But we can switch the view of the full details to the indicator values. So these are the raw indicator values that we use to see how well the right is being performed. So if we look at, for instance, the right to secondary school education, that is actually made up of the secondary school enrollment rate, which is 96.9%. So if we click on this data bar, this is going to tell us that 96.9% of secondary school age children in New Zealand are enrolled in secondary school. So that means we have some room to improve on the score. And if we click on the achievement of PISA maths test, this is one of the indicators used to measure the right to education. And 55.5% of 15-year-olds in New Zealand achieved level 3 or better on the PISA maths tests. So we can see that when it comes to the tests for either math, reading, or science, for the quality of education rights, we have some significant rooms to improve on these metrics in order to improve the overall HRMI score for the right to education. Further, we can break up the right to education to see how well New Zealand is doing based by sex. So if we look at just the overall right to education, New Zealand is doing 86.8% of what is possible given the level of income for the right for females to have education. And while it comes to males, this is 83.9%. Both of these scores fit within the bad or fair range, so there's still significant room to improve these scores. We can also track these scores over time. So if we go, for instance, to the quality of education of maths, we can see how this is doing with all people over time. And we can see since 2007, it was 87.3%, and now at 2019, we have severely declined to 71.8%. So what we can see here is that there's serious need to improve the quality of education, in particular to maths. We can also change this from an all people view to female and male view. And what we can see here is that over time, it seems that males are doing far better than females when it comes to these scores. So we should actually be doing a lot better for females and actually making sure that it is equalized across the board. And further down, we have the people at risk section. So every year we conduct a survey with our human rights experts that work within this country or may work remotely from another country, but has particular interests and is an expert within New Zealand. And we asked these people in New Zealand which people were identified as being at risk of having some right violated. So if we look at just the right to education, of the human rights experts that we have surveyed for the economic and social rights, if we click on the Indigenous people, 67% of those experts identified Indigenous people as being at risk of having this right violated. Now, this is not telling us that this is with a guaranteed certainty that 67%. This is telling us that based on the people that we have surveyed, 67% of them have identified Indigenous people. But they've also identified that 50% of human rights experts have identified that people of low or socioeconomic status as being at risk of having this right violated. And if we scroll further down, we do ask for more context because the context gives life to the numbers, gives life to the perceptions that they're giving us within these surveys. So when we ask for more context of who was particularly unlikely to enjoy their right to education in 2021, those without access to reliable digital connectivity couldn't access education during the lockdowns. The mainstream education system does not incorporate or respond to cultural specific education needs, which can become a barrier, especially for Māori and Pacifica communities. In particular, loss of te reo Māori and Mataturanga Māori impacts the ability of Māori families to access education, and people with low socioeconomic status do not have equal access to education, and people in rural New Zealand without access to internet. And you can explore this at your own time, looking at each individual economic and social right. Now, you can also go to the rights section and you can see how well the like neighbours of New Zealand is doing when it comes to the right to education. So for instance, if we go to secondary education, and we can filter this down into different sub-regions and regions. So if we filter it down to the Pacific, what we can see is that New Zealand is doing very well. And in fact, it's at the top at 95.8%, followed by Nauru at 95%. And Australia is third. So New Zealand is doing quite well on this metric. However, we could also change this down and we can actually have a look at countries that are within the high income category, and we can remove the Pacific region. And what we can see here is that New Zealand is within the top percent at 95.8%, and Canada is at the top at 99.7%. So if New Zealand wants to be the very, very best, the global best, they would have to reach the 99.7% or above to be up with Singapore and Canada. So that is everything for today. You're more than welcome to follow us on our social medias, such as Twitter, and you can also go to our YouTube channel where there'll be many other rights demos and other educational materials on our rights tracker and who we are. You can also go to the methodology section here and you can watch these short clips which explain measuring civil and political rights and economic and social rights. And you can also find the in-depth methodology handbook here for economic and social rights. And if you're interested in our data, you're more than welcome to download the data set after filling out this form here. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have an awesome day.